My name's Terry McKnight, and I am the chairman of the Amphibious Warfare Industrial Base Coalition. We are very fortunate to have a number of great speakers here today. First, you will hear from several members of Congress who are very important to us in their support for the funding of amphibious warships. Then we will have the Commandant of the Marine Corps. I just remind the Commandant's got a very short schedule today here, but we're very lucky to have him, so we're going to try to move things along pretty well. You will also hear from Brian Clark on the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments, who will speak about the subject of the very important small, medium, and large supplier companies across this great country of ours. The value of providing funding for the long-term and predictable and steady construction of amphibious warships. Companies that make everything from fan motors to waveguides to switches to everything. We've got a great suppliers over here that are here to support us. And these are the backbone of the construction of the ships. Huntington Ingalls, they build the metal and everything, but there are hundreds of suppliers that provide lots and lots of very, very important parts. And the important thing I need to stress is the long-term investment of shipbuilding. It's small jobs, it's big jobs, but it keeps this country moving and the economy going. So thank you for joining us today for this forum, and thank you for members of Congress for your continued support for amphibious warships and their program. And now I'll introduce our first guest speaker. Our first guest speaker is Representative Bob Wittman. He's from Virginia and chairman of the Seapower and Projection Forces Subcommittee. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chairman Wittman.
Well, thanks, folks, and again, good morning. Good morning. Gosh, what an honor and privilege it is to be here with you this morning. Lots of exciting things going on. Thankfully, we got a budget deal done, so an appropriations bill is going to be coming up. I think one of the most important elements of that appropriations bill are the dollars that are going to be devoted to shipbuilding, more specifically to amphibious ships. We know how critical that is to our nation here, and I want to thank everybody here with the Amphibious Warship Industrial Base Coalition for what you do as partners with our Navy Marine Corps team to make sure that we have the ships that are necessary. And folks, we've got some challenges ahead. We want to make sure we get that appropriations bill done. I want to make sure that with the appropriators, we continue to stress with them that we must have dollars there to build LPD 30 or LXR, whatever you want to term it. Those dollars must be there, and we're going to continue to advocate for that. We know how important that ship is to getting to 38 amphibious ships. I think those things are absolutely critical. Now, that's the first step in this challenge. The next step, and after we get this year's appropriations bill done and passed, is where are we next year? And we see some things that have come out recently. We see the President's budget for 19 that expresses the dollars that are there. A couple of, I think, challenging things that we absolutely have to address. This year's appropriations bill reflects $26.2 billion in 13 ships construction. In the President's budget, about $21 billion in 10 ships. Folks, the bottom line is this. We know what we need as far as numbers of ships. We know to get there in the most cost-effective manner, serial production is key. We know also we got to get off the roller coaster ride of building some ships and then coming back down and building more ships. You cannot maintain an industrial base. You cannot plan for future operations without the certainty that comes with that. The floor for shipbuilding in FY19 needs to be no less than $26.2 billion and 13 ships. Period. Bottom line, that's what we need to do. That's what all of us need to be for. I want to make sure we get that done. I've had great conversations with folks in the industrial base who are ready to go. They're in the starting blocks saying, give us the signal, we're off. We want to make sure, too, that folks understand from appropriators to authorizers the need for that. There's a lot more competition this year, even though the top line has increased. There will be more competition within that realm. I think that we have the most compelling argument to make about why those dollars must be devoted to shipbuilding. The ability for us to project power forward, to have a presence throughout the world, to make sure that we can provide for and protect American interests is through our Navy Marine Corps team. And it has to be through building ships. Let me tell you, folks, our Marines are great. They do fantastic work. But until we can get them to walk on water, which one day they will, we got to build them ships in the meantime. So we want to make sure that that happens. Let me talk, too, a little bit about this year's 30-year shipbuilding plan. It falls a little bit short. Well, it falls well short, I think. No criticism about the effort that went into the plan, but it has us at 342 ships. 355 ships, again, must be the floor. And we all need to make sure we continue to have conversations about that. Now, I understand there's some conditions in there that say, well, 342, and if Congress does some more funding, then we get to 355. I think, again, we need to be stating what is the objective. The objective is 355 ships. Another element there, too, that is concerning is where we take a dip on amphibious ships. And we get back up, but, you know, we can't be taking those dips again because of industrial base issues. We must have 38 amphibious ships. That's the requirement. Let's stand by the requirement. Let's put us on a path to get to and sustain 38 amphibious ships, period. Some things this year we're going to have to address in building amphibious ships. As you know, in this year's President's budget, there is not funding for an amphibious ship. There needs to be funding there. And we have to decide what's the next step. There's several things we need to look at. Another LXR, or do we reduce the center-to-center build on LHAs? Right now we're at a 7-year center. The question is does that sustain us with the number of LHAs that we have? We have to make sure that those things get done. So we will continue to have that discussion as we go forward. All these things are good things. I think the nation is finally starting to pay attention to the critical nature of ships, our Navy Marine Corps team, presence around the world, what we have to do to counter near-peer adversaries like China, like Russia, who continue to build naval capability that is in some instances equal and in some areas also exceeds where we are. I think the American public is starting to get it, that we can't be in that position if we are going to make sure that we maintain strategic superiority, and that has all kinds of other ramifications about our economic standing in the world. All those things I think are critical. We have to continue to communicate why 355 ships is key, why $26.2 billion and 13 ships is the floor, why we must meet the requirement of 38 amphibious ships, period. All of us have an obligation to talk about the importance of getting to that point, of sustaining those points and making sure that that continues into the future. I think the effort has begun. People are starting to understand this across the Congress. Not just members on the House Armed Services Committee, but other members of the House understand the importance of that. Our job is to continue that. I want to thank each and every one of you for the great job that you do and what you will continue to do. It's a great team effort here with our industrial-based coalition, with the Marine Corps, with the Navy. I think everybody's on the same page about what we need to do. We know that we can do more with our dollars if we get to the right production rate. Serial production is the key. So I want to thank everybody here. General Neller, thanks so much for your leadership and the things that we need to do. Lieutenant General Walsh, thank you so much too. We've had a number of conversations about the things we must do. All of us here have an obligation to continue to communicate that and make sure that the decisions that are made here reflect that. We have a spectacular case to make about why this is critical for our nation. It is the right argument to make. It is logical not only for lawmakers, for the public, for them to get there with us. Let's continue that fight. Thank each and every one of you what you do, what you've done, and what you will continue to do. May God bless each of you, and may God bless our great United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, very much. That got the crowd pumped up already. So now I'd like to introduce Representative Paul Cook. Representative Paul Cook of California. He is also the Vice Chair of the House Armed Services Committee, Tactical Air and Land Forces Subcommittee. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Representative Cook.
Well, good morning. I got to get everybody revved up after that little speech. Great job. I'm not going to talk very, very long. I think the oldest Marine in the group here, unfortunately. Jack, older than you. And I've been around a long, long time. And amphibious ships, and all you Marine Corps historians, amphibious warfare historians, have you ever heard of the Francis Marion? Yes, yes. I actually went over the nets in that thing, and in the old days, talk about primitive and everything, you had to have the biggest guys down there in that boat there, the Papa boat or what have you, and they had to pull that net close. Why? Anybody know? Because with the waves, you would crash in there, people would break their legs, fall off, die, and everything else. That was the old Corps. That was Iwo Jima. That was Okinawa. That was World War II. That was Korea. On and on and on. And then I also had the misfortune of riding on an Amtrak, if you will, in Vietnam that hit a mine. And you had about 11 seconds to get off of that. Anybody know the reason why? Yes, because in the bottom, in the old days, the fuel was in the bottom. And of course, I'm serious, 11 seconds, of course I was propelled, and explained much of my aberrant behavior today. Anyway, the Navy, the Marine Corps amphib ships have come a long way. The whole concept. I can remember Al Gray, banging on, and if anybody knew Al Gray in this room, force projection, and he would have a map. And if you want to understand amphibious warfare, you better understand a map, and you better look at the Pacific, and you better look at the Atlantic, and you better look at the North Sea. And that's the only way you're going to get it. Now, obviously, I'm a big, big supporter. I have a little bit of difficulty to understand all the technology of shipbuilding and everything. I am a dumb grunt, and my fellow congressmen and women will testify to that. But it is so important that we keep up with technology in light of not only the threats, which are constantly changing, but the technology that our adversaries have, particularly the Chinese and the Russians and the North Koreans and the Iranians and the terrorists and everything like that. So I'm not going to go into everything like that. I'm a big supporter. We need this. But you people in this room, you have a lot of influence. And I'm not going to let my colleagues off the hook. You're going to have to take some damn tough votes. And don't be a candy ass. If you think this is combat, you haven't seen anything. And we're going to have to do that, and people are going to say we don't have that money or anything else. And as I told other people, I'll be damned if I'm going to send a Marine into combat again that doesn't have all the tools, the wherewithal, and is ready to close with and destroy the enemy. Thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you, sir. I think last year you talked about when you landed with the Barbary Pirates, didn't you? Good. Well, thank you, sir. Great remarks. Next, I'd like to introduce Representative Mike Gallagher. Representative Gallagher is of Wisconsin and a member of the House Armed Services, Seapower, and Projection Forces Subcommittee. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Representative Gallagher.
It's a couple very tough acts to follow. I'm Catholic, and it's day 2 of Lent, and I gave up all coffee, alcohol, and sugar. So I'm going to be very subdued today, and I'll have to read from my notes because my thoughts are all jumbled right now. So if I seem mean, it's not because I'm just trying to imitate what the Commandant looks like all the time. So, but thank you for having me here today. You know, reading through the National Security Strategy and the National Defense Strategy, perhaps the biggest top-line point that comes out of it is that we're re-entering or entering a phase of great power competition. And I think that's sobering. I think all of us should reflect on what that means for what we're trying to do here in Congress. And I think what you are here today to support is incredibly important in light of that. The fact is we need amphibious ships to operate in a disaggregated concept of operations in an era of great power competition. Our newest amphibious ships provide valuable command and control centers and will serve as launching platforms for combat missions from a standoff distance. And their advanced combat and communication systems, their medical facilities, their vehicle maintenance and storage space, their defensive and survivability features give combatant commanders the tools to operate disaggregated from other amphibious ships to an unprecedented extent. We just heard incredible testimony yesterday from Admiral Harry Harris talking about the challenges in the Pacific, and the fact is we need more ships to deal with those challenges, as Chairman Wittman adequately laid out. We need more ships. We need at least 38 amphibious ships. We need 355 ships, and that's why Chairman Wittman led the fight to make that a matter of law in last year's NDAA. And I would second what he said about the 30-year shipbuilding plan. A 30-year shipbuilding plan that ignores that matter of law and does not get us to 355 in as practical and timely a manner as possible is, quite frankly, inadequate. And we look forward to working with all of you in the room to make sure that we can get there and making sure our defense industrial base is as healthy as possible. And we've heard a lot of testimony in the last year. I'm new to Congress. I've only been here a year, so I still get lost trying to find out where the bathroom is and everything. But we've heard a lot of testimony about how fragile our defense industrial base is, and particularly given some of our supply chain vulnerabilities. But as someone who has a shipyard in his district, I tend, every time I go there, to see nothing but the underlying strengths that we have as a nation. And I think if we here in Congress, in partnership with the Pentagon, can muster up the courage and the willpower to set the signal or set the direction for this country, where we need to go and why having 355 ships is so important, why having amphibious ships is so important, and then fund that adequately. I know, because I know these people, they're my neighbors, they're the people I represent, I know that the defense industrial base, which isn't abstract technology and things, it's people. At the end of the day, it's just people that wake up every day and want to go to work and have the privilege of building ships for this country, ships that will allow Marines and sailors to accomplish the mission and come home safe to their families. I know in my heart of hearts that they will respond adequately. So please, let us take advantage of this unique moment. Let us muster up the courage to provide our military with the resources that they need to prepare adequately to win this era of great power competition. Thank you for being a partner in that effort. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Representative Gallagher. Next, it's my honor to introduce Senator Roger Wicker. The senator is of Mississippi, and he's the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Seapower Subcommittee. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Senator Wicker.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really liked that last speech. I've missed the other ones, but Rob, I'm sure I would have liked yours too. It's good to be here with my teammate, Chairman Wittman, the co-sponsor of the SHIPS Act, which says we're really serious about 355 ships, and we mean business when we put it in the Defense Authorization Bill. I'm going to choose my words and stick to some prepared remarks because I want to be precise and I want to be heard. A lot of work remains. The Marine Corps' minimum requirement for 300 amphibious ships, there's a requirement there, but only 31 ships in its inventory. Nearly half are in maintenance. This is a sad testimony to years of budget instability, and I'll take my lumps for being part of that. But I hope those days are over. I'm hopeful that the budget agreement, which many of us swallowed hard to vote for last week, will not only plug readiness holes, but also spark a serious and sustained expansion of the fleet. Now, last year, when my subcommittee, which, by the way, endorsed the SHIPS Act as a part of NDAA on a unanimous bipartisan basis, when the Seapower Subcommittee was considering making 355 ships a requirement and putting it into law and having the President sign it, we had Secretary Lehman speak about the Reagan naval buildup. Secretary Lehman said that the Navy and the United States reaped 90% of the benefits of the Reagan buildup in the first year. That merits repeating. 90% of the Reagan benefits were felt in the first year. Why? Number one, sailors and Marines realized that they would be training and deploying on a modern fleet. They knew that Congress was serious. They knew the President was serious. Number two, the Soviet Union realized from the outset that the United States Navy would compete in every major maritime region, and they realized that we were serious and we were putting our money where our mouths were. And so did our allies. And the industrial base realized that the nation would support the shipbuilders, repair yards, and tens of thousands of suppliers. So we want that same sort of intensity, and we want it from the administration, we want it from the Pentagon. We are certainly going to keep up the intensity on the congressional end of it. The Reagan buildup worked because it was aggressive. It capitalized on a sense of urgency. And if we mean what we say with the war plan, that this is China and Russia now more than anything else, that same aggressiveness is needed today, particularly in terms of the amphibious fleet. So, there are three areas worthy of focus. First, Congress and the Navy and the Marine Corps team should accelerate the procurement of the 9th America-class big deck amphibious assault ship, or LHA-9. Ingalls Shipbuilding, home of the world's finest shipbuilders, located in Mississippi and other places, launched the Tripoli 3 months ahead of schedule. The Bougainville is ready to start fabrication, and yet the Navy is planning for a 7-year production slowdown between LHA-8 and LHA-9. This makes no sense, and this decision should be reconsidered. Second, Congress should keep the momentum going for the new LXR ship. Congress provided incremental funding authority in the FY18 Defense Authorization Bill for the lead ship. Thank you, Chairman Wittman. This step gives the Navy and Marine Corps more flexibility to pay for the first-in-class ship. And last, the Marine Corps should aggressively integrate offensive and defensive capabilities across the amphibious fleet, especially as the F-35B comes online. The new National Defense Strategy makes clear that the Pentagon's top priority is long-term strategic competition with China and Russia. The United States has always enjoyed freedom of maneuver on the seas. We need to decide whether those days are over or not. I don't think they're over, and I don't think members of the House and Senate feel that those days are over, but we need to act. Amphibious ships need more offensive punch and defensive protection. I want to thank members of the Industrial Base Coalition. I want to thank our friends in uniform, and I want to thank my colleagues in the House and Senate. May I just emphasize, when we say 355 ships, when we say what we say about amphibious ships, we mean it. We mean to be your partners. We are sending strong signals, and we hope the rest of our government is listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. That was great. Next, I'd like to introduce Representative Don McGitchen of Virginia. He's a member of the House Armed Services Seapower and Projection Forces Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to a great member from Virginia.
Good morning. It's good to be with you all, and as you've probably guessed, because you're not used to seeing me, I too am a freshman from Virginia's 4th Congressional District. I want to salute my chairman, Rob Wittman. Rob is an R, I'm a D. We might disagree on a lot of things, but there's absolutely no daylight between he and I on the issue of 355 ships. I would never pretend to read into the minds of what a United States Senator might say, but I was struck by what the Senator said, that we hope that the rest of the government is listening. since I am a D, I have a little bit more latitude in terms of criticism, and I am disappointed by the President's budget. It should contain more than 10 ships. Rob and I and others will make sure that we get to more than 10 ships, but it would help if we started off from a blueprint that was north of that number. But we'll get there because we understand the importance of what you do and what we need our Navy to do. From the very beginning, our country has always been a maritime power. The United States has interests around the globe. If we want to protect those interests, we need the ability to project power not just across a border, but across entire oceans. Together with our allies and partners, American service members promote international peace and stability, support human rights, and provide humanitarian relief, guarantee the freedom of the seas, and complete countless other missions that make the world a safer, freer, and better place. Their ability to do all of that depends in very large measure on the ships you build, so thank you for your good work. As has been said, we in Congress have a responsibility to help you and to do that work successfully. We understand that you need a reliable demand signal, predictable funding streams, and a steady, sustaining workflow. We know that unexpected changes and delays create debilitating uncertainty. We know that uncertainty in turn means layoffs, closures, decreased capacity, and higher costs to the American taxpayer. And we know that enough uncertainty over a long period of time makes it hard for all of you to stay in business. I am determined, and I think my colleagues on both sides of the aisle are determined, to ensure that the United States has a healthy defense industrial base. Accepting anything less would be a lasting threat to our sovereignty and to our security. Rob insisted that I go on a Codell in Norfolk. I got to go on a cruiser. I got to go on a sub. I got to go on a carrier. But do you know why the Amphibious ship was the best ship I went on? It was the... Well, there were no Marines that day, but it was the only one I could stand up on. Thank you, and God bless you.
I thought you were going to say the food, sir, because I commanded several amphibs. We always had great food. Now it's my honor to welcome Representative Jones from North Carolina. Please, ladies and gentlemen, give a warm welcome to Representative Jones.
Thank you very much, and to the Commandant of the United States Marine Corps. It is a privilege to represent the district. That is the home of Camp Lejeune, Cherry Point Marine Air Station, New River, Moorsock, and our Marines who need these ships, these boats, to help us continue to have a strong defense for our nation. I'm going to take very briefly a different course. I remember Admiral Mullins, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, appearing before the United States Congress when one of my colleagues, not myself, asked him, what is the biggest threat to the future of our military? He said the growing debt of our nation. When he made that statement, our debt was $14 trillion. Today, as I and my friends are speaking to you, the debt is close to $21 trillion. It cannot keep going that way if we're going to have a strong military. I am of the firm belief that my friend, who's not in Congress any longer, Charlie Rangel, and we used to walk back and forth when we had votes. Charlie Rangel, a Korean War veteran, said we need a war tax. I don't know if it will happen, probably not, to be honest about it, but there needs to be a national push for a dedicated war tax if we want to have a strong military. That's not very popular to say around many people, but if you want a strong military, you got to pay for it. Congress cannot continue to borrow from the next generation. And I want to see a strong military. And I want the Congress to have the courage to have this kind of debate sooner rather than later. Because this game of borrowing money from the next generation, I'm a Catholic also. I went to Ash Wednesday. I will tell you, born from the next generation is a sin. We need a strong military. It should be number one, quite frankly, based on my understanding of the Constitution. But we're going to have to pay for it, and I hope the next Congress, led by some of the leaders here today, Rob Wittman and others, will do what is right and start the debate. It won't happen overnight. Get the industry like yourselves engaged and saying we need a dedicated fund for our military. And let's do what's realistic for this country today, but the next generation. I close with this. I want to thank God for our men and women in uniform. I want to ask God in his arms to hold their families who've lost a child dying for this country in uniform. I want to ask God to bless you and your families. I want to ask God to bless the industry, that we will do what is right in the eyes of God for our military today and our military tomorrow. And I'll ask God to bless the House and Senate, that we will get realistic about the needs of this country today and the needs of this country tomorrow. And I'll ask God to bless the President. And I also want to end by asking God to please bless America. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for those inspirational remarks. Now I'd like to introduce Representative Bergman from the great state of Minnesota, excuse me, Michigan. Close, right? Sir, I apologize. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Representative Bergman.
Well, good morning, everyone, and I know you said good morning several times, so I could have you stand up. We could do a couple of jumping jacks in place, but we're not gonna. So the point is, that was the perfect lead-in with the Minnesota reference, because, and as Representative Gallagher said, and you heard a couple of other folks say they're Catholic, well, I'm a Lutheran from Minnesota. Okay, and why is that important right now? My mother, my mother's mother, my grandmother, was a ship sponsor in 1943 for the USS Nemasket, one of 5 medium-sized tankers built in Savage, Minnesota, where my mother was born. And why is that? Why was she that? Why, as a farm girl from Minnesota, why would she be chosen as a ship sponsor? Because those ships were built on the land that my grandfather owned, that he, in a deal with the United States government, there's a picture of him on the front page of the Minneapolis Star and Tribune, April the 3rd, 1942, handing his deed for his land to a government official for the war effort. So when you talk about having a vested interest through multi-generations who have served the country in so many different ways, I tell you, I'm proud to be of that lineage. And as it relates to Lent, as a Catholic, I have given up nothing, okay? Especially the passion for work and to get stuff done. We have a chance. Just last year, we celebrated the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. And when you bring it into, to religious analogies or comparisons, I believe that this 115th Congress and this president has the opportunity to truly be the reform administration that this country has needed for generations. It is time. It is overdue. And all I'm going to ask you, all of you, each and every one of you in here, to understand that, number one, we're all in this together. Number two, you've heard some very passionate speeches here by people who are still serving, whether it be post-uniform. By the way, was the Francis Marion, how many masts did that have? Okay. The point is, I can, because I still got 2 hands. I can give you 2 of one and 1 of another. The reality is, we come in here, and as Marines, we laugh, and we laugh till the point of crying sometimes, and when we cry, We cry because we celebrate our brothers and sisters. We celebrate our mission. We celebrate our commitment. And I'll tell you, as a freshman member of Congress, along with Mike Gallagher, and we have the LCS facility. It resides in Mike's district. The majority of the workers come from my district. It's right on the Wisconsin-Michigan border. But it is an example of a platform that is on time and on budget. So to you, the industrial base, you are the partners here. This is not an endless bank here. We have finite resources. I know the Marines and the Navy are going to work their backsides off to create the requirements. Now it's up to the industrial base to figure out a way to give the long-term sustainability of the shipbuilding, which employs people, provides product. And we know two things. The reality, it's not, you know, when you're driving down the road, it's not speed that kills, it's differences in speed that kills. We know you can't build a ship as fast as technology changes. So in that design, in focusing on the fight forward, we have to make sure we match that together. So knowing that the technology is going to change faster than the steel in the bow of the ship. So you got a partner here. Use us. Abuse us a little bit. That's okay, because we're going to do it to you too. So God bless you all, and thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. It's great, Mark, sir. Now it's my honor and privilege to introduce the Commandant of the Marine Corps. General Neller told me that he would tackle me at the podium if I read his bio. But one thing I would like you to know, he's a UVA graduate, and I think in the history of NCAA basketball, they're the first ones to go #1 in the polls after losing to Virginia Tech. Ladies and gentlemen, the 37th Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Neller.
Well, Representative Gallagher left. I was going to give him a little advice on Lent. You know, he's an intelligence officer, and he gave up coffee, sugar, and alcohol. So last year, I gave up alcohol, and then a week later, I testified about Marines United, so that was the end of that. And I was informed by my wife yesterday that since I've reached the age of 65, I don't have to forego meat on Friday, but I will continue to support her in that thing. So a lot of things said here today. I've got some remarks, and I'll go through them, but you know, I think we're kind of at an inflection point in this body, their Congress, in our nation, in the world. I'm going to get on a plane here and leave and go overseas and visit Marines and a bunch of our multinational partners, and probably a few people that are not our multinational partners that are in an exercise in Asia. Those Marines got down there on amphib ships. They got down there on amphib ships. And the F-35 is bouncing on the Essex right now. We're not waiting. This isn't something that's going to happen. It's happening. 13th MEU is going out this fall with F-35 to the middle, to CENTCOM. So it's time that we have this discussion. And for the last 17 years that we've been fighting this fight against violent extremists, those that would want to supplant us or take over their interests in the world have been out. They've been very, very busy. I think Admiral Harris talked about that yesterday. And so we're kind of at a place where, as a nation, we have to decide what do we want the United States to do? Where do we want it to go? What place do we want to hold? Our friends and allies are watching us, and those that are not our friends and allies are watching us. And I agree with Rep. Jones. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. And I'm a taxpayer just like anybody else. And all I can assure you is that your Marine Corps, and I'm not going to speak for Secretary Spencer or the CNO, but I'm sure they would say the same for the entire department and the Navy. We're going to do everything we can to get the best value for every dollar that we get. I will tell industry in here, your job is to give us a quality product. We owe you a requirement, and we owe you a steady funding stream. You got to give us good stuff. So we all got to raise our game, everybody. So let me talk a little bit about amphib ships as part of our new defense strategy, kind of build on what we talked about last year. So last year we talked about the importance of amphibious warships. And there's some in this House that don't agree with that. They don't think that capability is needed, that the requirement to conduct a forcible entry from the sea is not doable today. It's always been hard. When the Persians landed in Greece, it was hard. It was hard in World War II. It was hard in Korea. It's not easy to go to sea and put a force ashore. It never will be. I could give you example after example. I was on Guadalcanal last August for the 75th anniversary of the landing of Marines there, which turned out to be, quite frankly, a naval fight. And at one time, there were more soldiers on Guadalcanal than there were Marines, if you really study the history. But whether it was the Pacific campaign, whether it was Europe, whether it was landing Torch, Sicily, Normandy, that's what we did in order to survive that conflict. Think back, Grenada, Incheon. I can give you hundreds of examples of where a force deployed on amphib ships went somewhere and projected their power ashore across the range of military operations. Just this last fall, all the hurricanes. The majority of those forces that got there, they came on amphib ships. When you live on an island, you can't drive there. You cannot. So we'll try to be as flexible as we can be as part of that Navy Marine Corps team and employ this capability as part of our Title X responsibilities, which just let me remind you of what the law says, since we're quoting scripture. The Marine Corps shall develop, in coordination with the Army and the Air Force, those phases of amphibious operations that pertain to the tactics, technique, and equipment used by landing forces. That's what we're told to do. That's what the law says. And this is complex stuff. It requires planning. Remember the old acronym PERMA: plan, embark, rehearse, move, assault. And then that's just like the big stuff. It would probably be something different today, but I'm not going to try to come up with an acronym in front of this audience. But you got to have ships to do that. Right now, as was stated, our baseline requirement is 38 ships. And that gives us 2 Marine Expeditionary Brigade capability for forcible entry. But if you went out and looked at what every year they do the Global Force Management Plan, and all the combatant commanders come in and they say to the Joint Staff and the Secretary of Defense, here's what I would like as far as a force list. If we met everybody's demand, to include my good friend Kurt Tidd down in Southcom, we'd need about 50 ships. Because you got to figure overhead, you're going to have about 15–20% in the yard. I mean, this is heavy junk stuff, and it's got to get looked at. And the sea is a harsh environment. And so you just can't drive these things, you know, like a car. Even your car goes to the shop. And when your car gets old, it goes to the shop more often. That's why you sell it. We can't sell these ships. These ships are with us for 30, 40 years. So we got to take care of them. So why do our COCOMs want this ability? Why do they want the capability that comes with amphib ships? Well, because you use the sea as a sovereign space. You can move on the sea. You don't have to ask anyone's permission. You don't have to get basing rights. You don't have to sign a status of forces agreement. That U.S. flag sailing on the stern of that ship, or on the bow of that ship, that says, this is the United States of America on this piece of iron. This is our country. So whether it be to help our allies, provide humanitarian assistance, reinforce an embassy, or be a forward operating base, or to project power ashore to take care of some bad guys, or as Sergeant Major Green would say, change their zip code, that's what we do. But we're really organized trained and equipped to do that last part, changing zip codes. That is a capability that we must forcefully advocate for and build upon. The strategies that were talked about, the 30-year shipbuilding plan, the number of ships, when we all know the answer is you want to get the best value for the money, you got to have a multi-year program, you got to have a block buy, and most of the vendors in here will say, General, if you give me X, I can build you 5 for the price of 3.5, or something like that. I'm like, well, we'll go see Representative Wittman and Congressman Bergman and Rep Cook and Rep Gallagher, if he hasn't OD'd from loss of sugar. He's young. He hasn't figured it all out yet. But give him time. But the strategy that we've developed, the National Defense Strategy and the National Security Strategy, fits right into the fact that we need to be able to come from the sea. So if you look back, I mean, after the wall came down and after Desert Shield, Desert Storm, since that time, I mean, I've been saying this pretty consistently. I mean, we just kind of went where we wanted to go and did what we wanted to do. We just went. We sailed. We contracted ships. We flew. We landed. We assembled a force. Nobody bothered us. We got everybody all lined up. Nobody shot at us. There was no enemy air. There was no enemy submarines. You know, there was no. We didn't have to fight to get to the fight. We're going to have to fight to get to the fight if somebody wants to keep us from getting to the fight. They may not. But that's part of the problem where people think that maybe amphibious capability is not survivable because the development, proliferation of long-range precision, space-based surveillance that's held not just by nation states but even just groups that have the money to, I mean, you can't buy a coastal defense cruise missile on eBay yet, maybe on the dark web, but there's people that sell this stuff. And there's people that give it away because they would like to see us have to deal with that. So, you know, a lot of our deployed forces are within effective range of these weapon systems. And it was geography was mentioned. I mean, look at the map. The sea lanes, you know exactly where they are, and there are several places where they choke down, and it's a very narrow space. That's where the traffic goes. So if you want to affect the traffic, that's where you put your force. And if somebody tries to deny you that space, there are certain ways to go around, or you have to take it back. So if we are a maritime nation, we rely on trade. The trade travels on the sea. We've got to be able to control the sea. And we've got to deter any adversary who would want to deny that through our strength. So the National Defense Strategy talks about 4 layers or environments. It talks about the contact layer, the blunt layer, the surge force, and the homeland defense. The Navy Marine Corps, we're the force that lives in the contact layer. That's what we do. The ARGMU, the Carrier Strike Group, the Surface Action Groups, we're out there day on, stay on, patrolling the street like a cop, assuring our friends, deterring our adversaries. We're in the contact force. We're in an anti-access area denial environment every day. They just haven't turned it on yet. So what we've got to be able to do is if they do turn it on, we've got to have the capabilities within those platforms to survive and to blunt whatever they might want to do and stay in the fight long enough so that that surge force can get there. So our ARGMUs work hard to meet those demands, and the demand is there. So in order to be competitive against our competitors, to compete below the level of conflict, we've got to have amphib ships. And they've got to be more capable than they are today. They've got to be more lethal. And we have to have the connectors, the air cushion vehicles, the surface craft. One day they'll all be driven by autonomous. They'll all be autonomous. I'll predict that now. But right now they're driven by human beings. But we've got to have those things too. It's a package of capability. But we've got to have more capable ships. We don't have to have just the ships, more ships. We've got to have more capable ships. We've got to be able to take advantage of the technology that we've been able to procure. The F-35 is a very capable airplane. but it's got to be able to network. It will not realize its capability unless you can network that thing. You've got to exchange information not just between other airplanes, but you've got to exchange between the ships that are in the fleet, and you've got to be able to exchange that information to the force that's going to go ashore. We've got to have better air defense. We've got to have long-range precision strike. You may have seen a commercial or a video the other day. We shot a HIMARS off the back of the flight deck of an LPD. Okay, there are other capabilities that are even inherent within LPDs or other things we can do. These are warships. They're not transport ships. You're hauling a weapon. You're hauling Marines. Marines are a weapon. But for that Marine to be a weapon, that ship's got to get where it's going, and it's going to need more capability. So there's great opportunity right now. And again, that's another part of this inflection point, and I'll agree with what all the previous representatives and Senator Wicker said. I mean, there's an opportunity here. We figure out the appropriation. We figure out, how we're going to pay for it. We introduce these capabilities into these ships. We build more ships. We don't build and stop because it just costs more money, and it just drags this thing out. I'm in a shipyard. There's Americans down there, whether they be in Wisconsin or in Norfolk or in Bath, Maine, or in Pascagoula or out of San Diego or any other yards around here, and they do good work, but they've got to have the capacity to stay. Because once you learn how to do something, you repeat it, it just makes sense. It should get faster, it should get better, and it should get cheaper. So I appreciate the support of this forum for advocating for amphibious ships. Make no mistake, the force we have today is capable, it's lethal, and we go where we want to go and do what we want to do. And we've got to keep it that way. We will not do that in the future without being contested if someone wanted to take us on. And we don't want any American, any of our young men and women that go out there and wear this uniform and wear the cloth of the nation to be in anything but an unfair fight. We do not. So, and that's expensive, and I understand that. But if we receive the resources and we can come together on how we're going to plan this thing and work this thing, we'll provide a naval force that continues to be one of the most powerful naval forces that's ever sailed across this earth. So I'm excited. There's a lot of opportunity here. Understanding that there are lots of problems that we're trying to work on, just like the Congress. But this is still the United States. Whenever you go anywhere, and I would just say this, you go and we beat ourselves up pretty good, which I think is fair. We should be critical of ourselves. But whenever you go to a foreign country, if you travel, I travel a lot, and then people might wag their finger at you Americans, and like, well, I say, hey, just tell me the truth. Like, if you could live anywhere you wanted to live, like, where would you want to live? Well, I hear Austin's really nice. So we're not perfect, but I wouldn't go to Michigan. I get my TNR check for driving in whiteout snow conditions coming back the other day. Yeah. Was your technique still? Yeah, I was really scared. It works. Fear is good. Fear is good. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, again, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today, and I'd be willing to take a couple questions, and then I've got to hit the road.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Obviously, the emphasis here has been on Gators. Remember, Gators before has been, testing out some of the alternative platforms. But until you get to 38, you need other ways to get your Marines, other places they want to go. How's that working out? Is it to look for those alternative platforms?
The question is, what have we done with use of alternative platforms such as high-speed vessels? I think I still struggle. I used to know them as MLPs and HSVs, but we changed the names, and I'm still acronym challenged there. But we've put Marines on our own maritime prepositioning ships. We put them on LMSRs. We put them on TAKEs. We put them on high-speed vessels. We put them on the mobile landing platforms that exist, like the Polar that's out in the CENTCOM. And we're hoping to get the next ship, the Williams, into the Med. But the Navy's got to figure out with it, and they're going to build another one. And I would like them to build another one because for day-to-day stuff, you know, going around doing theater security cooperation where you're not worried about, you know, a threat or a subsurface threat or an air threat, because these are commercial class survivability on these ships. These are not, you know, level 2 survivability like you're going to get on an amphib ship. They're not framed out. They may have a double hull. So they're okay, and we'll use them and we'll leverage them, but they are not, let me just say, they are not warships. They're amphibs. They are not amphib ships. They may be carrying Marines or Special Operations Forces or soldiers. They are not amphib ships. So we'll leverage them. I mean, we're going to put, if there's a way to get there, I mean, people ask me, would you be willing to put Marines on littoral combat ship? Absolutely. Absolutely. But you're going to carry maybe, what, 30 people? But, okay, maybe the mission requires that. Maybe that's all we need. Maybe we just need to go somewhere and engage with a country and build partner capacity. Because one of the things we've got to do is we got to compete. Because I will tell you, our would-be adversaries are everywhere. They are everywhere. And they got big bags of money, and they don't care about human rights, and they are buying stuff. And they're building stuff. They're buying ports, building railroads, fixing roads, fixing bridges to get to market. I mean, it's just a fact. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Hi, Sidney Freeberg.
Hello, Mr. Freeberg. So good to see you again.
You're very polite, sir.
You're always polite.
Not going to try. The question to ask you mentioned a lot of priorities. You know, to get that high-end warfighting ability, where would you put the marginal dollar? Is it in trying to get more gray hull amphibs? Would it be, you know, more value, more ROI for some of these auxiliary platforms to free up amphibious for tasks? Would it be, you know, putting VLS on an LPD, for example, to give them offensive power? Would it be the electronics, those data links connecting F-35B to, you know, both land and air platforms? You know, where is the, if you can squeeze the dollars out of these budgets, where is the best use of that marginal dollar?
You know, that's a tough question. You know, where's the trade-off? Where's the knee in the curve between just more iron and better capability? So, I mean, you know, I'd say the answer is in the middle. To buy a whole bunch of ships that don't have survivability, that don't have the command and control, that don't have air defense, that don't have some form of surface-to-surface strike is not going to solve the problem. Just like it's not going to solve the problem if the number of attack submarines. I was down in San Diego, and they were talking, we were in a panel with the CNO and the Commandant of the Coast Guard, and they said, what would you like, you know, what do you see as far as naval force? I said, well, I want more submarines. Because I want to be able to get to the fight. And we're going to need more submarines to screen that move. So it's a joint fight. I say that as a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So I think, you know, if I would trade numbers of ships for capability if that was the trade. And I think it was mentioned, I'm not sure who was, but very wise. I mean, with technology changing, we've got to build these ships, particularly the command and control. I mean, the propulsion and all that, the ship, the shape, the ability for the ship to navigate, that's pretty standard. I mean, I don't think that's going to change a lot. But what the command and control suite is going to be, you're going to have to build that thing with a little more open architecture, because if it takes, you know, 5 to 7 years to build a ship, who knows what the communication technology is going to be in 5 years. I mean, I know you want HF radio, you probably want to talk to a satellite, but the links and all the things, but right now we're not even close to having that discussion with some of our amphibs, particularly the big deck amphib. I mean, we're putting a 5th gen airplane on that amphib, and we're running a less than 5th gen command and control suite. And so that, to me, that would be the first thing.
We've got time for one more.
Yes, ma'am.
To follow up on your response to Otto, if the Williams were placed in the net, what would it do? Who would it support? And are you still interested in, you know, if resources allow, maybe rebacking the motor training in addition to that capability, or what is this?
Well, if that type of platform, it would be assigned to 6th Fleet, so it would be up to General Scaparrotti or the commander of UCOM and the commander of NAVUR, Admiral Fogo, to figure out what they're going to do with that platform. So it would create a different dynamic for where forces were stationed. Would it change our view of whether or not we wanted to have a Marine Expeditionary Unit in the Med? No. I mean, I'm not a geography major, but I spent a lot of time looking at the map, and there's a couple places on Earth where you kind of put you in a position where you can maneuver yourself in a fairly short time. And you got to remember, that's the thing. When you're on ship, you can move. I mean, you're only making like maybe, depend. Well, if you're an amphib, you're probably making like 16 knots. You can go a little faster, but if you're going 16 knots 24 hours a day, you cover some ground. You cover some ground. Plus, you're bringing everything with you. But I would like to see that ship there, and that, because that would, I think, if I were commander or for General Waldhauser or General Scaparrotti, that would give me a great deal of flexibility as far as where I could go and what I could do and maneuver around with that ship and the capability it has. All right.
We've got one. Just real quick one.
Sure. Just a direct follow-up to Steve's question. I was wondering if you could highlight maybe some of the capability improvements that you were able to squeeze into the 19 budget request, and then anything that didn't quite fit that you might want Congress's help trying to do in the near term.
There's a lot of stuff in the budget. I mean, there's an increase in numbers of certain platforms. I think the thing that we're still grinding on Group 4-5 UAS, but we need industry to step up. We've changed our requirement, made it a little more streamlined, so it doesn't have to be all things to all people. But I think the best thing about the 19 budget is if we get an appropriation and based on the budget deal, we're not going to have this discussion next spring. And we're going to be good through 19. So there's a lot in it, and so I'm hopeful and appreciative if we get the money. And I do think, though, that some of the discussion about moving some of the hull forms to the left would be good. But then again, the Navy's going to have to recruit, because you can't just have the ship. You got to have sailors. You got to have a crew. We got the Marines. I'll put Marines on. That Marine's not a problem. I got plenty of Marines to put on those ships. But it's a bit of a process. So specific things, I think, we're looking at all the things that we believe we've not had to deal with for the past 17 years of war, whether it be information, electronic warfare, whether it be improved intelligence, analysis, air defense, things like that. So those are the things that are still driving us, in addition to being able to get the maneuver from the sea. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, sir. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Representative Russell. Representative Russell is from Oklahoma, and it's a real pleasure to have you today. Please give a warm welcome to Representative Russell.
I know some people are wondering, what is an Army guy doing here talking about amphibious warfare? We're a maritime nation, all the way since we've been wearing tricorn hats in this country. And we're surrounded by massive bodies of water. Our international trade and commerce has to be secured by keeping the sea lanes free. And it's not just the military capacity, but when you think about all of the commitments and things that we that the world looks to the United States to be a part of. Amphibious warfare is an integral part of that. And it's not new. Oftentimes we think of the amphibious landings in World War II, where you had the assaulting of beaches and very difficult situations. But really you go back to from the crossing of the Delaware or during the Civil War, Island Number 10 or Vicksburg or going to different places. Amphibious warfare and its concepts are really something that we've seen throughout our history. And what's important about the industrial base is to not lose that capacity. It's not cheap, and yet the purchases that we make oftentimes we see last for decades and are pivotal into the national security of our country and also our allies. And so while something up front might be expensive, when you're getting 30, 40 years of use out of it, is it worth it? Of course it is. But what we can't do is lose our capacity to produce, our shipyards, our innovations, taking an idea and trying to make it flexible, as we saw General Neller address, where you have capacities that, okay, if we had this ship and we put this on it, and we now with the Osprey and so many different things, we're doing things in amphibious warfare as concepts that were never thought possible before. Even the helicopter, you know, the nascent technologies that we've seen and the development of that. But it's vital that we continue to support it and continue to fund it. And not just for military purposes. We think of our own nation. Just in the last year, what country on this earth could survive 3 major hurricanes, 2 floods, and 2 fires? Ponder that for a moment. 3 major hurricanes, 2 floods, and 2 fires, and minor storms to boot, and yet we were able to absorb it. Why? In large part because medical aid, water, Marines, armed services went, answered the call. Infrastructure was taken out so it could be protected, and then it was put back in by our military. And who does that? Well, it's folks that have a capacity to go out to places like American citizens that happen to live in Puerto Rico or something of that nature, where you can float up and, as General Neller had said, take all your stuff with you. And then we think of how many times have we seen non-combatant evacuations because we had an amphibious capacity that we could roll onto the coast of Africa, or we could go and assist allies in Europe or in Asia. We think back to devastating things like tsunamis, where we were able to come to the aid of allies. And who was the first there but the United States and its big amphibious ships and capacity to roll up and do humanitarian efforts? And so before we cast a critical eye on the worth or the cost of such things, we need to ask ourselves what human toll would be exacted not just in warfare but in humane operations without these capacities. And it's very important that we have that. So I will always be a supporter of amphibious warfare, even though my only experience in rubber boats invading Santa Rosa Island in Ranger School, I'm not sure that that quite qualifies, but it was an amphibious landing. It is really important, though, that we continue to develop things and not see an eroding and an archaic ability where we can integrate new systems and have that. I'm excited about not only technologies that we've used and upgraded and modernized, but even what we see with light aircraft carriers now, where we can take a battalion landing team of Marines, or maybe we can put an F-35 on board, or we can take an Osprey, or we can do whatever, a lot of different things. And then it's incumbent upon us as members of Congress that we make sure that we reinforce those policies that allow forward basing. When I look at what the Marines are able to do at Darwin with our great allies in Australia and different things, is there anyone that wishes we didn't have those capabilities now with Kim Jong-un, one miscalculation away from complete destruction, perhaps? And so it's important that we remain vigilant. And amphibious warfare is as vital an aspect of our nation's defense as any other ability, whether it be on land, air, Seapower, but having this indirect approach in places that only the United States can project power with our allies is very, very important. So I'm honored. I was a bit surprised to be asked to come and address, but you know, we love our Marines and all the things that they do in our Navy and all of the hard work that they do, and it truly is you know, hats off to all of the work that's done. But let's not forget our industrial base so that we can keep the shipyards open and have that capacity in the future. Thank you so much for letting me address you today.
Sir, thanks for joining us today. Okay, next we've got Mr. Brian Clark. Mr. Brian Clark comes to us from the Senior Fellow at the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments. He's going to present to us his latest amphibious warfare study. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Mr. Brian Clark.
Well, good morning. I know we're near the end of this, and I don't want to take a whole lot of your time, but I wanted to throw out some facts and a little bit of our analysis to kind of inform the discussion about should we be buying more amphibious ships and what we should be buying and how we should be doing that. So first of all, we got some copies of it back there. We did an amphibious warfare study recently looking at how is amphibious warfare likely to evolve in the future. We came in that study and a couple of previous studies to a very similar requirement as what the Navy has today. So we talked about 38 amphibious ships being the requirement, 12 large deck amphibious assault ships, and 13 smaller LPDs and 13 smaller LXRs. So 38 ships total. We came to a very similar number in our analysis, but through maybe a different process than the Navy did. So that requirement, though, used to be driven by the need for the Marines to be able to do very large assaults, so 2 or 3 MEB assaults. That used to be the requirement until the past 8 or 9 years or so. The requirement today of 38 ships is driven by the posture that our Marines and Navy forces have to maintain overseas continuously. So as General Neller was saying, when the combatant commanders come to them and ask them for forces, the number would go up to about 50 or 55 if they just sourced what the commanders want. Well, what they are able to source and what we came to and the Navy came to in terms of requirement is around 38 ships. But it's that posture, the day-to-day presence of Marines and sailors out there as part of this, in the National Defense Strategy, contact force and the blunt force to both interact with and then react to crisis. So the question that often gets asked then is, well, what happens when there's a war and these amphibious ships are out there and we're going to we're going to collect them all together and do the Iwo Jima style assault? And a lot of people kind of argue that that's maybe not feasible. And General Neller talked about how anti-ship cruise missiles and precision-guided weapons would make that hard to do. Well, it would be hard to do, but also there's something to think about in terms of the changing character of warfare, and that's something we've been looking at. And you hear in the news a lot about maybe gray zone warfare. You see what the Russians are doing in Ukraine, what they're doing now in the Baltics, what the Chinese have been doing in the South China Sea. They realize that a big war is probably bad for them from a number of perspectives, but it also provides the U.S. a pretext or an excuse, if we will, to escalate. So we can bring in our big war capabilities like we have in previous conflicts if they give us a reason to do so. So if they keep the level of warfare low and less intense and keep the number of casualties down, don't involve our allies directly, they can avoid giving us the ability to come in there and intervene on their behalf. And they'll eventually get what they want, it just takes a longer period of time. Well, that means that if you're going to be fighting a much smaller set of conflicts, skirmishes, crisis response, dealing with threats to access that may manifest themselves in the South China Sea, you're not doing a 3-brigade assault. You're doing a smaller raid. You're setting up expeditionary advanced bases in places where we want to be able to put fires onto another target. Or we want to go with our allies like the Philippines and actually set up a place from which they can operate, we can operate F-35s, and they can have some protection for places like Palawan that doesn't have protection necessarily by itself. So the character of warfare is changing and is leading us towards what's probably going to be a much more distributed and a much longer range set of amphibious operations than we may have in our head as the model from Iwo Jima and Incheon. that makes amphibious forces, in a lot of ways, our first line of defense. And so what you're seeing even today is the amphibious forces, the ARG and CENTCOM, is there continuously, even when carriers come and go, because we've been gapping those carriers sometimes. In the Pacific, our amphibious forces are forward while carrier strike groups go off and they might do an exercise like a Malabar or a Talisman Sabre with our allies. So increasingly, our amphibious forces are that forward force, and the advent of the F-35 and the increasing use of the LHA, LHD as a light aircraft carrier, as we just heard, is going to make the amphibious force even more relevant to situations where we're likely to find these smaller confrontations occur, but not the big war that everybody is thinking would be the model of the past. So if we're going to maintain that kind of force, we've got to be able to equip it properly. We've heard some discussion with General Neller about the Marines need to get the kind of connectors and the kind of ability to project power at long ranges. If you can't do an amphibious assault over the beach, in the face of anti-ship cruise missiles, you might have to do it from hundreds of miles away using MV-22 and protected by F-35. So you need to be the ability to, once those forces get ashore, protect themselves with electronic warfare, with air defenses. The Marines are making some of those investments, but they need to make more, and they're looking for resources to help with that. The Expeditionary Advanced Base idea in particular is something that's going to make Marines able to contribute to deterrence and initial parts of warfighting and even a high-end conflict, especially when you're dealing with these gray zone kind of confrontations. But they've got to be equipped properly, and there's a lot of work, and General Walsh has been working really hard on coming up with capabilities that contribute to new concepts for operating in this much more distributed fashion at much longer ranges. Now to the industrial base. So we've been working on some analysis of the industrial base. We've got a report coming out later this year. But to give you some facts that we've already, and some analysis we've already sort of come to the realization of, you've heard a lot of discussion today about keeping the shipbuilding industrial base strong. Well, there's a couple of aspects to that. There's the shipbuilders themselves, and then there's the suppliers to the shipbuilders. So I'll address those separately. So shipbuilders, we've got 7 shipbuilders in the United States that build U.S. military ships, more or less. 2 of them are relatively small shipbuilders that build LCSs and the expeditionary fast transport. Those shipbuilders they do have the fragility that perhaps if the type of ship they're building goes away, they may not really be able to stay in business. But there's a large commercial shipbuilding demand in the United States, not for big ships that go overseas, but for coastal ships and for river ships and dealing with the Jones Act kind of ships. So there's actually a significant demand for commercial ships that are smaller in size, and these shipbuilders are thinking, maybe I want to go into commercial shipbuilding. So if we don't continue to build those kinds of ships, they'll turn to commercial shipbuilding, which is more lucrative in a lot of ways and easier to deal with than the government. Now, in the larger shipbuilders, like the ones that build Huntington Ingalls that builds amphibious warships, they may not go out of business because we fail to accelerate LHA-9 or accelerate the LXR. But we're going to spend a lot more money for those ships when we do buy them. The Navy shipbuilding plan, which came out this week, showed with the budget, showed opportunities for the Navy to accelerate these ships. If you look on there, there's charts showing where they had places where they could add ships or move ships forward, but didn't do so because of financial constraints. Those opportunities should be taken by the Navy. In our analysis at CSBA, and also the Navy's own analysis, this 38 ship requirement isn't going to be met until the mid-2030s at this point. So accelerating that forward will give the amphibious force that the nation needs, or that we think is appropriate, in a much quicker period of time. So, for example, accelerating the LXR a year ahead of time to reduce the gap between LPD and LXR. Accelerating the LHA-9 so you don't have a 7-year gap between those ships being built. Why that's important is for 2 reasons. One, at a shipbuilder, if you're building a ship and it takes 4 years to build that ship, for example, that first year or first year and a half, you're working on the hull, and then it moves on to another part of the shipyard, and then you're building modules, and then other parts building, and outfitting the ship and doing the electrical. Those all happen in phases. I can't go and do the electrical on a ship that just has a bare hull. I have to do that in the modules. I can't build the modules totally until I get started with the hull. So what happens is parts of the shipyard will become idled as the ship goes through production. And if I don't have a new ship coming, those people that work on the first part of the ship, now don't have anything to do. So either they have to be laid off, or they got to be repurposed, or you got to retrain them, or you've got to idle them, and you accept the cost of that. That cost gets built into what the shipyard will charge the government, because they have to keep the place running in order to be ready for the next ship. And they don't want to go out of business because they want to serve the nation and be a good steward of the taxpayers' dollars. So that is the biggest problem we have right now, is if we don't keep these ships in steady production, we're going to pay more for them even down the road. And if we think we're going to buy them, and we know we are, then you might as well do it for the best cost possible. The other part of this is the supplier industrial base. And here there are the likelihood of suppliers going out of business if they don't get a steady line of production. And in a lot of cases, suppliers are part of a larger company that has a big commercial business. So I'll bring up one example. York air conditioners are on almost every Navy ship of some form or another. Well, they're part of a larger holding company or larger conglomerate. Well, that larger conglomerate is about 80% commercial. So they look at York as, okay, it's our military business, we're contributing to the nation, we're serving the nation, but it's not a business that makes a lot of money, and it's a business that drives a lot of hassles because they're dealing with a changing demand from the government, uncertain futures. So companies, York is hopefully staying in business, but other companies have not let that happen. They've obviously chosen to take their commercial business and make it all commercial and get out of the military shipbuilding supply business. That's happened on many occasions, and it will continue to happen if we don't provide a means for them to understand that their future business is going to be able to be sustained. Just one other data point is, so if you look at the military industrial base, the entire military industrial base, together, its market capitalization is less than Facebook. So right now in the United States, we're used to aerospace and defense being a big driver of industry and a big driver of the economy. Not anymore. When you talk to, and I've gone to a couple of these conferences with Merrill Lynch and Citibank, the commercial world dominates by far, and the IT world dominates by far anything we do in the defense sector. So you've got to think about very carefully, suppliers that have a commercial business are not going to be motivated to continue to build military capabilities unless they see a viable future there. Even if they don't make a lot of money, at least they can not lose money, which they prefer not to do. So that's a concern on the supplier side and the concern on the shipbuilder side. So our recommendations, and they're in that handout over there, are to accelerate LXR forward to reduce that gap, prevent idled shipyard workers, allow a steady demand signal to be provided to suppliers, accelerate LHA 9 so that we can do the same thing there, because that'll be an extremely long gap for a ship that takes 4 years to build. We're now going to take 3 years extra and have people sitting around. And our recommendation also is that the Navy move towards more block buys. So not just block buys where you buy a ship a year and then the shipyard doesn't know if the next year is coming or not, but a block buy where you contract to buy a group of ships, and then you might pay for it incrementally as the demand for the money comes, but you've made a commitment on the part of the nation, a part of the government, to buy those ships in a larger number. That allows the shipyard to start hiring workers and training them. It allows suppliers to understand their demand signal going into the future and manage their workforce and invest in the infrastructure and the people to do it. So those are our recommendations, and thank you very much for having me, and thank you, Terry.
Thanks very much. Brian will be around here to answer any questions that you might have. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for being here today, and thanks for supporting the Amphibious Industrial Base. Have a great Navy and Marine Corps Day.